You'd think after 8 years of building something, they'd let you leave with dignity. But that's not what happened. Natalie has an announcement, someone said just loud enough to slice through the morning tension. I sat at the long glass table, coffee cooling in my hands, eyes scanning the Monday Ops update on my screen. Then I heard her voice. Gavin, your leadership style is incompatible with the collaborative direction we're taking Gravitas Dynamics. Effective immediately. Just like that. In front of everyone. No warning, no closed-door conversation. Just public execution under corporate lighting. I didn't speak. I didn't ask why. I just nodded once, closed my laptop, and said, "Understood." Natalie didn't flinch. She never did. All polished teeth and buzzwords, barely out of her 30s, but with the confidence of someone who had never had to clean up after a system crash or call a supplier at 2 a.m. to keep a line from shutting down. She'd been with the company all of 10 weeks. Me, 8 years. Director of Operations, since Gravitas was still struggling to ship on time, still stuck in that cracked brick facility off the rail yard. Back when orders got canceled, because a $12 sensor didn't arrive on time. Back when no one outside the executive board even believed in this company. But I did. And I built a system that worked. Quietly. Without the press releases and boardroom flair. I made it reliable, I made it profitable, I made it respected. But none of that mattered now. I packed my office in silence, 2 boxes, one for the pictures and small things that reminded me who I was when I still believed in the future here. The other for what I built. Binders, flowcharts, vendor maps. The skeleton of the company they thought they understood. She showed up at the door halfway through. "Gavin," Natalie said, a softness now replacing the clipped tone from earlier. "This isn't personal." I didn't stop packing. "We just need someone with a more flexible, modern approach." Still, I didn't respond. Because how do you explain to someone like her that the very rigidity she despised was the reason Gravitas made it through the 2022 supply collapse? That those vendor relationships didn't come from an online portal, but from real people, real visits, real trust. How do you explain that a lower price point wasn't a spreadsheet miracle? It was loyalty, built one handshake at a time across hundreds of miles. You don't. Because people like Natalie think leadership is measured by who talks the most during meetings, not by who stays late, making sure tomorrow doesn't break. I drove until I found the Columbia River. It was colder than usual for March. Wind scraped at the windshield, as if asking why I didn't scream, why I didn't fight. But I didn't have that in me anymore. For the first time in 8 years, I had no place to be at 1 o'clock on a Monday. So I just sat, watching barges push through the current like they had somewhere important to be. "Congratulations on your freedom," I muttered to no one. And maybe it was that simple. Or maybe I just didn't know yet that this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of something else. The text started before I even got home. What the hell happened? Did you resign? Is this a restructure thing? Vendors, colleagues, even a few quiet folks from finance I'd barely spoken to. Word had spread fast, and not kindly. But I stayed quiet. Not because I was afraid, but because I'd seen this movie before. Natalie. She came in talking about synergizing procurement workflows and vendor platforms. Said she was bringing in a firm to restructure supply chains. Said face-to-face visits were a cost center without measurable ROI. And she canceled my quarterly road visits. That was week 2. Week 3, she changed the payment terms for our 3 longest-serving suppliers. Said they'd adjust. "We're too important to them," she said, like that was a shield. But she didn't know that I structured every single contract for manual renewal. No auto-renewals, no default terms. Just me, and a phone call. That was the whole point. Not because I didn't believe in systems, but because systems only work when people trust them. And she'd just told every vendor that their trust didn't matter anymore. 3 days after I left, I got a call from Reed Hanley, chief engineer at Kestrel Systems, one of our top clients for years. "Gavin, they really let you go. Seems that way." He sighed. "That's their loss. Want to grab lunch?" We met at a place we both liked. Old wooden booths, no music, just the clink of plates and real conversation. "So what's next for you?" he asked after we ordered. "Evaluating options," I said simply. He nodded, then leaned in. "You hear about the chaos already starting." I raised an eyebrow. "Redstone Machining just pushed delivery dates for Gravitas, and Virex won't commit to pricing on the next quarter." I kept my expression still, but inside, that small click of confirmation. It was already unraveling. Not because I made it happen, but because Natalie thought she could replace people with portals. Reed wasn't finished. "You ever hear of Monica Wren?" he asked. "She runs Ravenhall Systems, biomedical fabrication. Good company. But they're scaling fast and cracking at the seams operationally. I told her about you. She wants to talk. I said I'd think about it." He smiled. "You built something real, Gavin. Doesn't matter if they see it. The right people still do." That night I got a message from Edwin Sloan, my old boss, founder of Gravitas. "Heard what happened. Unbelievable. Call me." And that's when I felt it. Not anger. Something colder, clearer. Natalie made one mistake. She thought what I built was transferable. She thought trust was an add-on, something you could plug into Slack. She didn't realize what she dismissed was never just my methods. It was me. The call with Edwin lasted under 10 minutes. He didn't need the details. He already knew. "Gravitas was never built to be automated," he said flatly. "It was built on trust. You carried that, Gavin, not the dashboards." He'd retired the year before. Said he wanted more time with his grandkids. Sold most of his stake to a private equity group out of Austin. Kept 15%, mostly for sentimental reasons, or so he'd said. Now he sounded almost betrayed. "You did what I couldn't," he added. "You made the damn thing work. I hope she knows what she started." But she didn't. Natalie thought operations was just a chain of inputs and outputs. What she didn't know or didn't want to was that Gravitas had survived the worst supply collapse in recent memory because of those old-fashioned, slow-moving, deeply human relationships. In 2022, when containers were stuck for weeks and raw materials were rationed like wartime rations, we never missed a major deadline. Not once. And it wasn't because of luck. It was because I could call Redstone's VP on a Sunday and get priority. Because I remembered the name of his daughter. Because I sent flowers when his father passed. That doesn't show up on quarterly reports. But it saves millions in the long run. Natalie wouldn't understand that. She came from slides and bullet points, optimization models, not handshakes. By the end of the week, the cracks had widened. My old assistant Mason, still working inside Gravitas, texted me. Redstone increased their pricing 14%. Virex delayed component delivery by 5 weeks. Natalie's panicking. I didn't reply. Not because I wasn't tempted, but because I didn't need to. People draw their own conclusions, especially when they've worked with you for years. Especially when they know what happens when that trust is broken. That weekend I drove out to Ravenhall Systems, just to see the place, just to listen. Monica Wren met me at the door herself. "You look like a man who didn't deserve what happened," she said. I smiled politely. "I'm not looking for revenge, just a place where work still means something." She walked me through the manufacturing floor herself. Wore boots, not heels. Knew the names of the line supervisors. Asked about their kids, their weekends. It felt familiar. Not because it was perfect, but because it was human. By Tuesday, I'd accepted the offer. Chief Operations Officer at Ravenhall, full authority to restructure the supply chain. Monica's only request. "Make us strong, like what you did before, but faster. We're running out of margin for error." She wasn't wrong. I spent my first day shadowing the warehouse crew. Inventory was a mess. Inputs were unpredictable. There was no buffer. No trust yet built with suppliers. And yet the bones were there. It was a place that could grow, if done right. 3 days later, the calls started again. Not from friends. From Natalie. Voicemails at first. Then emails. All professional. Tense. Controlled. "We're experiencing some challenges with legacy supplier contacts. Would you be available for a brief consultation? We're happy to offer a compensation package for your time." I didn't respond. It wasn't pettiness. It was principle. You don't get to dismiss someone in public and then ask for their help in private. That's not leadership. That's panic. On Thursday, she showed up in person. At Ravenhall. Receptionist buzzed me. "There's a Ms. Pierce here. Says it's urgent." I checked the camera feed. There she was. Hair flawless. Posture rigid. Tapping one manicured nail against her phone screen like it owed her something. "She can wait," I said calmly. And she did, for 27 minutes. Then she left. No message. No apology. But her face said everything. That polished confidence had started to crack. Later that day, Mason sent me another update. 3 vendors now claim Gravitas is deprioritized on their order books. One of them said, and I quote, "We don't work with spreadsheets, we work with Gavin." He added a final line. "Honestly, we're falling apart." Still, I didn't reply. It wasn't pride or smugness. It was knowing this was what happens when you remove the human element from a system built entirely on trust. This wasn't sabotage. This was gravity. That weekend, Edwin invited me over. Said he wanted to show me something. He was in his garage, tinkering with an old motorcycle when I arrived. The same one he used to ride to work when Gravitas couldn't afford proper parking. You remember when I said I kept my 15% stake for sentimental reasons, he asked. I nodded. Well, now I'm being pressured to sell, at a discount. I frowned. They trying to consolidate before reporting. Exactly. Natalie's investors want out before the next quarter. They're seeing the writing on the wall. I leaned against his workbench, hands folded. What if I said slowly there was another way? He stopped, turning the wrench. What do you mean? What if Ravenhall bought Gravitas? He stared at me. You're serious. Think about it. We need manufacturing capacity. They're losing control. The Salinas plant is underutilized. Their workforce is skilled, but unmotivated. They'd never sell to you. Not if they knew. But if the offer came from a neutral third party, someone like you, he laughed. A quiet, surprised laugh. Gavin Roth, you're not looking for revenge, you're playing chess. I didn't smile. I'm just trying to save 200 jobs and prove that respect still matters in business. Edwin made the call on Sunday. To Gravitas's investors, not Natalie. He kept it simple. A party I represent may be interested in acquiring your assets, quietly, fairly, before things get worse. They didn't push back. They didn't even ask who the buyer was. Just wanted a number. That told me everything. They weren't running a business anymore. They were looking for a way out. Back at Ravenhall, we moved fast. Monica brought in a small acquisition team. No suits. Just people who'd done this before. People who understood that saving a company wasn't about flipping logos or rebranding websites. It was about structure. People. Processes. Trust. I gave them everything I had. Vendor rosters. Production line assessments. Employee reviews. Even blueprints for how we could expand capacity if we brought Gravitas's Salinas plant under our umbrella. It wasn't about stripping the old company for parts. It was about integration, preservation, rebuilding what mattered and discarding what didn't. Meanwhile, Gravitas continued to spiral. Mason kept me in the loop. His texts were becoming more desperate. Redstone upped prices again. Virex cut volume by 30%. They lost Kestrel Systems. Reed pulled the contract last week. Natalie's holding emergency meetings every other day. Each message was another signal fire, another sign that what we'd built wasn't as easily replaced as she thought. They hadn't failed because I left. They failed because they assumed the structure would hold without understanding the foundation. Then came the letter. A formal notice from Gravitas's legal department, accusing me of violating my non-solicitation clause, of interfering with vendor relationships. I handed it off to Ravenhall's legal counsel. They laughed. There's no merit here, they said. You didn't reach out to anyone. They came to you. They were right. I hadn't made a single call. I didn't have to. That's the thing about loyalty. It isn't bought. It's earned. And when you treat people like replaceable parts, they walk. 2 weeks into the acquisition process, I got a message. Not from Natalie. From someone I hadn't expected. Eleanor Trask. Gravitas's head of finance. Sharp, detailed, professional to a fault. We'd always worked well together, even if we weren't exactly close. Her message was simple. Can we meet? We chose a quiet coffee shop, halfway between our offices. She arrived late, looking exhausted. Not tired like she hadn't slept. Tired like she hadn't had clarity in months. They're blaming you, she said, for all of it. The delays, the lost contracts, even the supplier walkouts. I stirred my coffee. I had 10 minutes notice before I was let go. Hard to plan sabotage in that time. I know, but that's not what's really happening. She pulled out her tablet and opened a spreadsheet. Here, this is why you were fired. I leaned forward. She showed me the investor margin targets. They wanted to squeeze an additional 15% out of procurement, not by growing volume. By cutting vendor costs, aggressively, unsustainably. They couldn't do that with your contracts in place, she said. Because they were fair. Exactly. Your contracts protected both sides. Annual renegotiation. No auto-renewals. No hidden clauses. You designed it so the relationship mattered more than the transaction. I nodded slowly. And they couldn't risk you pushing back or going public, so they made it loud, to scare everyone else into silence. She paused. I handed in my resignation yesterday. I looked up. Why? Because I refuse to be complicit in what's coming next. She hesitated, then added, They're planning to shut down the Salinas plant, move production offshore, cut 200 jobs, maybe more. My stomach tightened. That plant wasn't perfect, but the people, good, skilled, loyal. I stood up, tossed a few bills on the table, and walked Eleanor to her car. "Thank you," I said, "for being honest." She nodded. "I just want it to go to someone who still gives a damn." I drove straight to Edwin's house. Told him everything. He didn't say a word until I finished. Then he leaned back against his workbench, arms crossed. "They're going to hollow it out," he said. "Turn it into a spreadsheet success story until it crumbles. Not if we get there first." He raised an eyebrow. "You think we can move that fast?" "With the right trigger, yes." He smiled slowly. "That Kestrel contract. If we pick it up under Ravenhall's name, that alone makes Gravitas worth saving. Then let's do it." The next day I called Reed. Explained the situation. The acquisition in motion. The manufacturing alignment. The potential. He didn't hesitate. "I'll sign a 3-year contract," he said. "Guaranteed volume. On one condition." "What's that?" "That you run it. All of it." "You have my word." That contract changed everything. It gave us leverage. It gave us numbers. But more than that, it gave us proof that Gravitas was still valuable, just not under its current leadership. Monica reviewed the proposal that afternoon. Didn't even blink. "Let's make the offer, but through Edwin. Keep Ravenhall's name off it until they bite." 3 days later they did. Harder than we expected. No negotiation. No pushback. Just relief. Natalie didn't even ask who the buyer was. Her investors just wanted out before next quarter's disaster hit the reports. They didn't see a rescue. They saw a fire sale. The integration plan was quiet, precise. Monica gave final approval on a Friday. Edwin made the official call that evening. And the following Monday, we walked into Gravitas headquarters. Exactly 3 months to the day since I'd been fired. I wore the same suit, same shoes. Only this time, I wasn't an employee. I was the one holding the pen. Monday, 9:00 a.m. We entered the Gravitas boardroom as a unit. Monica, Wren, Edwin, Sloan, our legal team, and me. There were no name tags, no formal welcome. Just a long, polished table, surrounded by tired men in tired suits. Natalie was already there, flanked by 2 of her investors, stiff and silent, reading from tablets, as if they hadn't already made their decision before we walked in. Then she saw me, and for a moment, something in her faltered. Her eyes narrowed, jaw tensed. "What is this?" she asked, her voice cutting across the room. Edwin was calm. "Mr. Roth is representing the acquiring party." "You can't be serious," she said, standing. "You're selling to him." "The preliminary agreement has been signed," said Jeffrey Crane, the lead investor. "Ravenhall Systems will assume control of Gravitas's assets, including the Salinas facility." Her voice cracked. "You can't do this. He sabotaged this company. He poisoned our vendor relationships." I stayed still, hands folded in front of me. No anger, no victory in my face. Just clarity. "I haven't contacted a single Gravitas vendor since I was dismissed," I said, voice level. "I'd be happy to provide phone records, server logs, and sworn statements to that effect." She shook her head, searching for something, maybe outrage, maybe denial. But the silence in the room didn't give her anything to cling to. "What you're experiencing," I continued, "is what happens when you reduce partnerships to transactions. When trust is dismissed as inefficiency. When you treat long-term suppliers like obstacles instead of allies." She looked to the investors for help, but they said nothing. They weren't interested in defending her. Not anymore. They were here to salvage whatever was left. Monica stepped forward. "We're not here to dismantle Gravitas. Our goal is integration. We'll retain the brand absorb production under Ravenhall's operational framework and preserve as many jobs as possible." And Natalie, one of the junior investors, asked. "Her services," Monica said plainly, "are not required during the transition or beyond." Natalie froze. I could almost hear the question forming in her mind. Was this the plan all along? "Did you set me up?" But the truth was simple. "No, Natalie," I said, anticipating her thoughts. "You set yourself up when you ignored the people who made this place work. When you thought leadership was about replacing names with platforms." She didn't reply. She just gathered her notes slowly, paper rustling in a room that suddenly felt far too quiet. And as she walked past me, no eye contact, no apology, I said nothing. Because what needed to be said had already been lived. By Wednesday, the acquisition was public. Headlines were neutral, controlled. Ravenhall Systems acquires Gravitas assets amid leadership shift. The internal message to staff was clearer. Operations continuity is the top priority. Job preservation is central to our transition plan. Mason texted me. "You did it. You brought it back." I replied. We brought it forward. Over the next few weeks, I moved between campuses, listening, learning. Gravitas still had good people. People who had weathered chaos with dignity. People who just needed to know someone saw them again. We kept 185 of the 200 roles at Salinas. Some departments were merged, some trimmed, but every decision was made face-to-face with respect. I met with each team personally. I didn't promise miracles. I just promised clarity. That alone meant more than empty slogans ever could. The suppliers. They came back. Redstone confirmed they would honor full volume if we returned to handshake terms. Virex said they missed the human part of doing business. It wasn't complicated. Trust doesn't require a 5-step rollout plan. Just honesty. Then one afternoon, as I reviewed onboarding documentation in my new office, a clean windowed space overlooking both shop floor and river, the receptionist buzzed me. "There's someone here to see you." Name. A pause. Natalie Pierce. I took a breath. "Tell her I'm unavailable." But she says she'll understand. I watched her on the security feed. Still perfectly styled. Still postured like a press release. But this time, no confidence in her shoulders. Just fatigue. She waited 17 minutes. Then she left. Didn't slam the door. Didn't demand anything. Just walked out quietly. It felt strangely appropriate. Later that evening, Mason handed me a new report. Customer retention had stabilized. Order timelines were improving. And vendor response times. Back to pre-crisis levels. I closed the file slowly, then looked out the window. The sun was lowering over the river. The same Columbia current I had sat beside the day they let me go, wondering if any of it had been worth it. Now, it felt different. Not triumphant. Not even relieved. Just settled. Monica joined me for a final meeting that Friday. She poured tea instead of coffee, a small gesture but thoughtful. "You don't gloat," she said, smiling softly. "Not my style." She nodded. "This wasn't just a win, Gavin. This was a restoration." I looked down at the contract folder. My equity stake had been finalized that morning. Real ownership. Not in name, in purpose. 6 months later, Gravitas was no longer what it had been. It wasn't a shell of its former self. It was something stronger, leaner, more honest. We'd rebuilt. Carefully. Not just the operations, but the culture. The trust. The reason people walked in every morning and still cared. We kept the Gravitas name, but it stood for something else now. Not the legacy of a company that tried to gut its own foundation, but the idea that when people matter, performance follows. Redstone and Virex became cornerstone suppliers again. Their leaders told us the same thing in different words. We'll always do business with the ones who show up when it's inconvenient. We showed up. That was the difference. Our new systems were modern, sure, but the backbone was still human. I insisted on personal visits for every key vendor before the next fiscal cycle. Not to audit them, to listen, to reconnect. Because I hadn't just been rebuilding a supply chain. I'd been repairing a network of people who'd once believed in something real and needed a reason to believe again. Reed Hanley from Kestrel Systems stopped by for lunch one afternoon. Same spot, same booth. This time we didn't talk about the chaos. We talked about progress. "Feels strange," he said, cutting into his steak. "Not having to chase deliveries every other week." That's the idea. He studied me for a long moment. "You ever think Natalie learned anything from all this?" I paused, watching the server refill our water glasses. "No," I said simply. "I don't think she learned the right lesson." He nodded once. Didn't press. He didn't have to. I'd heard she was consulting now. For another firm in Chicago. Private equity. Her specialty. Making things leaner, faster, sharper. On paper anyway. But you can't reduce human relationships to formulas. Not without losing something vital along the way. Not without paying a price eventually. On my way back from lunch that day, I passed the new break room. Someone had left a sticky note above the vending machine. 3 words scribbled in black marker. "Still human here." It stopped me for a second, then made me smile. That's what all of this had been about. Not payback. Not pride. But proof. That dignity in work wasn't an outdated concept. That leading with principle didn't mean falling behind. That keeping promises, even when it's slower, harder, less efficient, builds something no algorithm ever could. I spent more time on the floor now. Less in meetings, more in motion. Walking the lines. Asking questions. Taking notes. Listening. One afternoon, I paused by a quality control station. 2 engineers, both former Gravitas staff, were reviewing a new hybrid unit. We integrated 3 product lines into one. One of them said, 3. Gravitas Robotics, Ravenhall sensors and custom firmware from Kestrel. Took some doing. Looks solid, I said. They looked up a little surprised I was there. I wasn't supposed to be. Not at that hour. Not on that floor. But I liked showing up when no one expected me. It reminded people that leadership didn't belong in an office. It belonged in motion. Before I left that evening, I checked my calendar. Vendor tour in 2 weeks. Greeley, then Bismarck. Long drive. I didn't mind. I'd always liked the road more than the podium. There's a clarity to it. No noise, no spin. Just the next mile. And the next handshake. Later that night, I sat in my office for a few extra minutes. Not finishing anything urgent. Just sitting. Watching the quiet hum of the factory as the last shift wound down. The lights flickering off one section at a time. I thought about Edwin. Still retired. Still building motorcycles in that same garage. He'd offered to join the board after the acquisition, but declined when it closed. "You've got it handled," he said. "But I'll be here, just in case." I thought about Eleanor Trask, too. She never came back. But she sent me a note after the acquisition was finalized. "Thank you for reminding me that ethics don't have to be a liability." It wasn't long, but it was enough. Mason had grown into his new role quickly. Now production lead. Running 2 teams, clear-eyed, calm under pressure. He still called me sir sometimes, even though I asked him not to. Old habits die hard. But respect, real respect, isn't about titles. It's about showing up when it counts. The following Friday, Monica invited me to a leadership dinner. Nothing fancy, just a meal. After dessert, she stood to speak. No grand toast, just a few quiet words. When Gavin first walked through Ravenhall's doors, we were holding things together with duct tape and hope. The table chuckled. She went on. Now we're building systems that last. Not because he saved us, but because he reminded us what good leadership actually looks like. I looked down at my plate, a little uncomfortable with the praise, but grateful, because that was the point. Not to be remembered, but to leave something better behind. I walked out alone that night. Cool air, clear sky, no noise but my footsteps on the sidewalk. And I thought back to that afternoon, 6 months earlier, when I'd parked by the Columbia River with nowhere to be, when everything I'd built had been dismissed in a single sentence, and I'd walked away with nothing but 2 boxes. One for the past, one for the proof that it had mattered. People ask me sometimes if I regret not fighting harder in that room, if I should have shouted, demanded answers, thrown everything back in their faces. But the truth is, I never needed revenge. I just needed restoration. To look around and see good work continue because someone cared enough to rebuild it the right way. To give the right people a place to thrive. To make sure the next Natalie thinks twice before calling loyalty a liability. Not all justice is loud. Sometimes it's a quiet shift. A slow rebuild. A return. And in that return, there's peace.